Hello and welcome to this webinar this evening. This is one of our Tuesday evening webinars where we in GlobalNet 21 try to look at some of the big issues of the 21st century. And I'm Francis Steely from GlobalNet 21. Now, one of the things we've been looking at through the beginning of this year, and we will be continuing to do that, is how the digital revolution is impacting on us all. In a way, it's what some people refer to as disruptive technology, technology that's so pervasive that it changes everything. And it has an implication for the way we do business, the way that we live our lives, and to our education. And that's what we're going to look at today, how this pervasive technology, this disruptive technology, artificial intelligence, and robotics impacts on education and how we do it. And we've got with us to talk to us about that, Paul Clarke, who you can see here. He's going to come on in a sec. And Paul is someone who works in Ocado, and he's developed a lot of simulations and mobile apps, and he knows a lot about this field of artificial intelligence and robotics, but he has an interest in how it impacts on society in general, particularly education. And what he's going to do today is give his impressions from what he does in his work on the impact of this new technology, this changing technology on education. Now he's going to speak for 10 minutes and I'm going to ask him a few questions and then I'm going to take your questions. So please type your questions into the chat box on the right hand side. Don't wait for us to finish our part of the webinar. You can put those comments in from now. The webinar itself will be recorded, I hope by tomorrow or at the latest the next day. It will be up on YouTube and you can then see it again if you want, or you can pass it on and share it with others and disseminate it. So it will be available from then. Anyhow, Paul, thank you for doing this webinar with us, and it's great that you're here. And I'm going to hand over to you now to start your presentation.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Francis, and good evening to everybody. The journey towards artificial intelligence has been a long and at times tortuous one. There have been a number of false dawns and missed opportunities along the way. So for example, when Frank Rosenblatt invented the neural net back in 1958, his work was largely shunned by the academic community. But now neural nets and their deep learning derivatives are at the heart of modern machine learning. And the hype that accompanies disruptive technologies such as AI makes it easy to dismiss them, but AI really is different. AI enables you to do the really exciting things with other disruptive technologies, such as robotics, big data, and the Internet of Things. Because without AI, a robot is arguably just a rather expensive pile of electromechanical components. Furthermore, AI is a recursive technology. You can use one generation of AI to help train the next. And a recent example of this is obviously how AlphaZero, armed only with the rules of chess, learned to play the game better than a human after just 24 hours of playing itself. And then there's the fact, though, that AI can discover or at least unearth information that has been hidden to humans, perhaps because of factors such as complexity and bias. So when it comes to disruptive technologies, AI really is the one to rule them all, or perhaps at least until quantum computing comes along and knocks it off that perch. Now, the UK has played a leading role in the evolution of AI in areas such as thought leadership, academic research, and technology startups. And the good news is that the current government appears to be keen to nurture AI and to help it flourish alongside other related technologies such as robotics. And indeed, there's some good thinking and debate going on. The recent Growing the Artificial Intelligence Industry in the UK review made some important recommendations. And the House of Lords Select Committee on AI has been gathering evidence from multiple interested parties and is about to publish its report. But the intersection of technologies such as AI, robotics, and cloud computing, along with the Internet of Things, is where the really exciting things start to happen. This technological planetary alignment is leading to smart mobile machines that can communicate with one another, store their data in the cloud, and interact with the world around them. This is indeed the technology cocktail that powers Ocado's end-to-end e-commerce fulfillment and logistics platform for online grocery, and the swarm robotics technology in our new generation of automated warehouses. But the advent of cloud-based AI services has completely democratized access to AI. It's made it a commodity, and in so doing has redefined the baseline for smartness. Now for a few cents, you can call a cloud service, pass in some data, and get back a smart prediction or insight. And applications that don't take advantage of these new cloud-based services will probably not be best of breed. And unfortunately, when it comes to this seismic shift in smartness, many organizations still appear to be asleep, or at least dozing. It's like standing around a swimming pool, debating how to learn to swim as outside a tsunami is approaching. And indeed, an ideological war is waging between the optimists, such as myself, and the dystopians in terms of predicting how our AI-powered future will play out. Listening to this debate, one could be seduced into thinking that we've got a choice about whether or not to embrace technologies such as AI and robotics, but we don't. The UK may be an island, but we cannot afford to behave as such. The technological tide is coming in all around the world, and playing King Canute will not end well. What we have the choice about is how to make the best of the opportunities in front of us and to successfully navigate the inevitable transformational challenges along this journey. We also need to strike the right balance between legislation and innovation. If we get this balance wrong and unduly throttle our innovation, then countries who prioritize innovation will have the advantage. Legislating against a future some may fear could lead to unintended consequences that are even more unpalatable. And one of the key challenges the UK faces in responding to the opportunities related to AI is the skills deficit. Data science and AI lie at the most overheated end of the software engineering skills spectrum, and there's a massive shortage of graduates and postgraduates emerging with these skills. But what's not talked about enough is the fact that these skills lie at the end of a digital literacy pipeline that stretches all the way back to primary school. There's a massive amount more that government, NGOs, and business can do to help manage the flow along the entire length of this pipeline and to plug any leaks. If we want a larger and more diverse set of graduates emerging at the end of the pipeline, then we need to do much more in the early stages. For example, investing in more properly qualified teachers for these subjects, mandating schools to offer these digital literacy subjects up to A-level, and making these subjects mandatory within the curriculum at GCSE level, just as we do maths and English. For these are essential transformative skills, not just for those who may go on to become software engineers, but potentially for everyone. This is why 4 years ago at Ocado, we launched our Code for Life initiative, where our engineers volunteer their time to create a completely free online resource to help teach digital literacy in schools. Code for Life is now being used by over 130,000 students across nearly 100 countries, and you can find it at codeforlife.education. But true digital literacy is much more than just teaching children to code. For example, we need to teach them to be data literate, to understand how to organize and manipulate data, to gain insights from them, to visualize them, to build models for them, to understand the dangers of bias, and so on. We also need to help our children understand the amazing possibilities and current limitations of technologies such as AI and robotics, the important ethical and philosophical questions around their applications, what it means to be human, and so on. We need to find ways to maintain the level of interest in STEM subjects demonstrated by girls of primary school age, which currently decays as they progress through the educational system. We need to be weaving this digital literacy throughout the curriculum. However, this pipeline must not stop at college or university. It needs to continue on into the workplace. And here we need to do much more to incentivize organizations to invest in continual learning, particularly when it comes to subjects such as AI. We need to fuzz the boundary between education and work life. We need to prepare children for the process of continual learning and the inevitable reskilling that awaits them. Put another way, we need to teach self-reinvention as a meta skill and to reframe the midlife crisis into an art form. But I believe we need to do more, much more. Many of the skills and techniques we're currently teaching our children will be as devalued in years to come as the encyclopedia has been by the advent of the World Wide Web. Instead, we need to focus on teaching enduring meta skills such as collaboration, creative thinking, problem solving, intersectional thinking, mind mapping, goal setting, and entrepreneurship. Indeed, if education is all about preparing the next generation for their future life and instilling along the way a love of learning, then I believe we are failing in terms of the structure and curriculum of our current education system. The current relentless focus on exams, tests, and the regurgitation of mark schemes is consuming all of the educational oxygen, leaving teachers with little or no time for spontaneity, for sharing their love of a subject, or for just pursuing the curiosity of their students to see where it might lead them. If we allow education to switch our students off the joy of learning, then we will do them an incalculable disservice. So I believe we need to completely rethink our education I believe we need to completely rethink our education from the ground up, and in so doing, future-proof the underlying curriculum. For example, I believe we should set up an independent royal commission to drive this educational reform that unashamedly steals the best educational ideas from around the world, as well as coming up with new ones. We need to see this reform not as an endpoint, but as just the start of an ongoing process of rapid educational disruption. We need to give teachers the inspiration, autonomy, and support to drive more research and curiosity-driven learning into all areas of the curriculum in order to produce original thinkers rather than parrots. We need an education system that generates more big thinkers with big visions to tackle the many big problems that we have created for ourselves. Put it another way, we need more Elon Musks. We need to do more to actively engage with China and learn how they are stoking their innovation cauldron. We should encourage more collaborative research and experimentation between schools, both within the UK and around the world, in order to foster greater understanding across cultures, but also to crowdsource learning and to generate exciting new data sets that can be used to drive digital literacy. I believe we should establish an annual science and a set of annual science and innovation competitions for different age ranges along the lines of the Google Science Prize and X Prize. Exploring ways to use AI within education to scale the teaching of digital literacy could be an example of a grand challenge for such a competition. The current apprenticeship levy should be transformed into a training levy that can fund not just apprenticeships, but all manner of training, reskilling, and continuous learning within business, especially in areas such as AI and robotics. Government and industry, I believe, should fund a network of static and mobile maker labs accessible to makers of all ages, because makers are an extraordinary potential well of innovation that has been largely ignored and left untapped by government policies. It's in a situation like this that our 5-year democratic term really does us no favors, because the scale of the transformational change we now face in order to respond to the challenges and opportunities presented by technologies such as AI and robotics cannot be addressed by short-term thinking. This is going to be a long-term game that we need to start playing now, because it will take over 20 years to work its way through the educational pipeline. That's why I believe we need to follow in the footsteps of countries like Finland and remove the educational football from the political playing field, because this is a game that needs to be played in a radically different way. I believe that now is the time for political thinking and leadership that are truly holistic, agile, bold, and disruptive. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was quite a tour de force about your views. Incidentally, did you notice my Freudian slip at the beginning when I talked about destructive technologies and not disruptive technologies, which is sort of quite interesting. Anyhow, I mean, it's very interesting what you said, and we've recently had a meeting where we streamed the ex-Minister of Education in Finland talking about what they do there, and it was really, really amazing. So, I mean, maybe I could start by asking you, I mean, what has led you to be so interested in education? I mean, so many people work in your industry now, but they don't all have the passion about education that you do. What's led you to that?
Well, I think it really, it's both, well, it's on 3 fronts. It's as an employer, it's as a citizen of the UK, and it's very definitely as a father. And I think all 3 reasons are why I believe that education is so important, because, you know, as a technology business, we believe we have to do something to try and give back, and we have, you know, strong relationships with universities. We have a thriving internship program, And the obvious next step for us was really start thinking about what we could do further back in the pipeline. And that's why we created Code for Life. And I think as a father, I listen to my children, talk about their experiences of going through education. And of course, I've been through it myself. And I just believe that we need to do something quite radical to prepare for this future, because it's a non-linear change that we're facing. And it's gonna come much faster than we perhaps anticipate.
Tell us a little bit about Code for Life and what that is.
So we had this vision a few years ago. We wanted to create a way as part of our CSR initiatives, to enable our staff to, particularly within Ocado Technology, the division I run, to volunteer their time and to create a scalable resource. Because although it's fantastic what companies do going out and helping schools directly, but given our size, we thought that we could have greater impact if we created an internet-based resource. And obviously, lots of people have created these kind of digital resources before, but having spoken to quite a lot of teachers, we realized that what was really important here was also to help the teachers in the delivery of these materials. So, we created lesson plans and templates, and really made it hopefully extremely easy for teachers to use these materials and to guide students through the process that starts off, with a kind of point and click type interface to learn coding, but then moves on to actually using real coding languages. And now we're about to bring out a new sort of multi-user game that's aimed at an older age group. The first resources were aimed at Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, which was launched at the point where the new primary curriculum came out a few years ago. And the new resources will be aimed at sort of Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4. And I think our intention is to kind of work up the age range, and also to then start moving our shift onto things like data literacy and ultimately onto AI literacy.
I mean, when you develop templates like this, what's the response from the teaching profession and the people you deal with? Are you fighting an uphill struggle, or are they receptive to the change that you think is necessary?
Extremely receptive. I think they're in a very difficult place, because the history in the UK of ICT teaching, as it was, means that we don't have a huge number of teachers who are skilled at teaching computer science. And obviously that's one of the key challenges we face, and it's why we need to look for other ways, including the use of AI, to help with that teaching. But what we found was that if we gave them the kind of the lesson plans which allowed them to take the students through a process of learning, but without having to have a huge wealth of expertise beforehand, they were delighted. And indeed, we've had some fantastic feedback from teachers, and also they've got involved in the process and helped improve the materials as well. So they're very definitely partners, and now we've got people around the world translating these materials into other languages, which is fantastic.
I mean, if schools and teachers are partners, what about at the top, at government level? Are they restrictive, or are they partners as well?
Well, we've been doing this very much as our own initiative. We're delighted if government wants to get behind it as well. But I see this as a collaboration between business and education institutions and government. And I think we all have a part to play. And there are some fantastic examples of businesses creating educational initiatives, and there's some fantastic things that have been done, such as computing at school and other such initiatives. And I think there's so much to do that, of course, the more that government can do, the better. But I think it very definitely has to be a partnership with industry.
I mean, in a way, there are two parts to your presentation. One, to say there's something wrong with the present system, school system, and maybe we can come to that in a minute. And that, you know, we need to get rid of the exam system because it really restricts people and so on. The other part is we need the skills in order to fill that gap. We need the skills of digital literacy for the teacher and for the students as well. I mean, how important is that? Because you can do all the reforms about getting rid of exams and having collaborative learning and so on, but without having a base of digital literacy, you won't succeed, will you?
Yeah, and I don't think I was actually suggesting that you can necessarily get rid of all exams. I think it's just that you have to, I believe the balance needs to change, and we need to create more space for allowing curiosity and love of a subject to flourish, because I think what you're really teaching students is if you like, the skills around learning and how to think, because those skills will endure and they will carry on into their working lives. And I think it's absolutely crucial that when children leave school, they leave with a joy of learning and an excitement about the fact that that process is going to carry on in their working lives. And indeed, you know, I think it's absolutely crucial that it does, and therefore it's also crucial that organizations are incentivized to continue that process, especially in the light of technologies like AI and robotics that are going to mean that maybe you know, existing knowledge in terms of tools and technologies will become eroded, and therefore this process of reinvention and reskilling, you know, needs to be a continuous one. So it's a continuum that really honestly stretches all the way from primary school right through people's adult life. And I think blurring also the relationship between work institutions and academia, because in the future it may well be that, you know, people won't just leave college and go into work. There may be cycles. They may want to go back to college. It may be that colleges and universities can find better ways to engage with businesses, to share their amazing resources and to open them up, both in order to get more money, you know, into those educational institutions from business, but also to give business access to the amazing kind of educational resources that exist within those educational institutions. So it's a two-way street, and I think we can only all benefit from greater collaboration there.
So it's not just collaboration in the classroom, it's collaboration between the, if you like, stakeholders in education, which is universities, it's business, it's community groups, and it's schools, and it's them coming together and looking at how the change in society will impact on them.
I believe so. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, we're beginning to get some questions in now. And let's have a look. Terry Lone says, you've spoken about the need to reinvent the curriculum, but can digital technology and AI change how people learn, as well as requiring to change what people learn? In other words, do you change how they learn?
Yeah. I believe it definitely can. Obviously, some subjects it's probably more applicable to, not least because of where, if you like, what is the current state of the art in terms of AI and machine learning. You know, because those technologies are clearly on a journey, and you know, as is talked about a lot at the moment, you know, the current state of the art is that machine learning is extremely good at individual specific tasks, but you know, nobody has created a general AI that can in any way get close to you know, the capabilities of the human mind. So we have to be realistic about where it can be used, but I believe, you know, there are definitely applications for using those technologies, particularly perhaps to help supplement or overcome the shortage of teachers that we have to teach those subjects in the first place. So, you know, I would encourage organizations to try and create online resources that schools can use. And the smarter those resources are by using AI and machine learning, the better, because that means that the students can self-serve. You know, they can actually do learning on their own, and then it can be escalated to a teacher when they get stuck, or indeed they can help each other. You know, I think there is an opportunity to create you know, much more kind of peer-based kind of learning where people, students can work with one another and get help from one another. So there are all sorts of different models, and obviously the cloud, facilitates that kind of model.
Yeah, you talked about machine learning, and Marcello's talked about NLearn, which is an interesting example of machine learning, which helps to create a personalized learning platform. You may have heard of it. I haven't, but I'm sure you probably have.
I haven't actually.
You haven't. Okay, but you talk about collaborative learning and working with teachers and peer learning particularly, because one of the problems that maybe you face in this huge wave of disruptive technology that's hitting all of us in schools as well is that things are changing so fast that often the student is ahead of the teacher. The teacher may be back in the analog days if they're older, and even in the sort of primitive digital age if they're younger, but children are far, far more advanced. So in a way, are you saying that we should create a system of learning that's student-led, because they're at the edge, the rough edge of it?
I agree, and I think that's when I said about creating space within the educational system for more kind of curiosity-based learning, and also for teachers to in a sense act as guides and facilitators, but to hand over more control to the student, because how often is it that a teacher comes into the room and says to a class, so what do you want to know? What excites you about this subject? Where should we go today? And of course, there has to be some structure, and it can't just be a complete free-for-all, but there needs to be some space, I believe, for the student, as you rightly say, to lead the process, and for the teacher to be a guide along that journey, rather than it being the typical kind of model where, I know everything and I'm now going to impart that knowledge to you. And of course, I think the most exciting educational collaboration comes when it's a shared journey and both teacher and student are learning together. That requires some space. And if the pressure is, just focus on, the tests and the curriculum that's going to lead to an exam and learn, what the mark scheme says, rather than really focus on the underlying understanding, then, we're not really, I think, engaged in the process of true education.
Do you find amongst some teachers there's fear? For example, Hannah Dyson has said, do you ever see a time when robotics might take over from the teacher in the classroom, and the classroom becomes redundant, and there might be some resistance from teachers because of their jobs?
Well, we're a very long way off that, as I say, although I believe this technology is going to go to extraordinary places that we have no idea of at this moment, and I think it's very difficult to crystal ball gaze that. I think clearly humans have a huge amount to contribute to the process, in terms of emotional intelligence and wisdom and empathy and other human traits that it's going to be a very long time before AI I believe can truly replicate those. So I don't think teachers need to worry about that. I think it's about having more time to concentrate, hopefully, on what is the true value add that humans can bring to the process, and less of it dealing with things like marking and kind of supervision and so forth, and actually allow free teachers up to be more creative themselves.
Yeah, I think in the promo for this webinar we talked about a school in the States, the Kodiak Burr School, which has purchased 12 telepresence robots, which are really robots with an iPad attached to it. And you have a teacher in the States who's running the class, but then they've got these robots in schools all over the world, often in places that can't afford teachers, where the robots go around and interact with them with the iPad and the teacher. That's not challenging the teacher's job, is it? It's actually enhancing the teacher's job and taking education to places where they can't afford it.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen some of those experiments, and that's another really exciting way, along with things like telemedicine, of allowing those kind of expertise to be more accessible, and why wouldn't that be a good thing? It's especially if it's the choice between that and not having a teacher at all.
Okay, I mean, Fong is saying, rather tongue-in-cheek, I think, that it's not just about technology, it's also about pedagogy. She's saying, what's in AI for me as a teacher in order for me to adapt to new ways of teaching?
Well, I think I've tried to just answer that, where I said I think that what AI can do can take some of the some of the less creative, you could say repetitive tasks, out of the process. I mean, I'm not a teacher, so I can only talk about it from the point of view of having been through the teaching system myself and being a father. But I clearly there is, homework to be marked, exams to be administered, and I think what can happen here is you can give tools to the student to allow them to go on a journey, and a journey that hopefully is personalized to them. So that one of the challenges, I think, in a class is the fact that you may have people at many different levels of ability, and who want to go at different speeds, and who have also different learning styles. And I think being able to accommodate different learning styles and different rates of learning in a class by having smart tools that do that, then surely that's a good thing. That allows the teacher, it's a bit like allowing the teacher to be the conductor, of the orchestra with lots of different, instruments being played, and hopefully in harmony. And I think that's the opportunity that these kind of smart educational resources offer.
I mean, that's a good way of saying it, being the conductor of an orchestra, because we've trained teachers, haven't we, to be instructors, to be the authority figure, and we've got to get away from that. The teacher should be the inspirer, the catalyst, and as you say, the orchestrator. And is that happening, or are schools still not doing that? I mean, Terry is very pessimistic about making the change in schools, which he sees are still very hierarchical.
Well, I think that's where hopefully we need a change of policy to allow teachers more freedom, because most teachers I've ever met, they've gone into the profession as a vocation with a huge love of the if you like, the art of teaching, and what we need to do is free them up to do that more creatively, by I think both changing the curriculum, changing the structure of the educational system, but also giving them better tools, particularly in some of these new areas. And it's not just about digital skills. It's there's obviously a lot of thought going on at the moment about vocational learning and accommodating a much broader set of educational outcomes, rather than squeezing it all into a certain number of GCSEs and perhaps A levels, and then maybe a college degree after that, because if people are going to have to reinvent themselves many times down the road, and have multiple careers, and where necessary go back and learn new skills to drive those careers, then we need to prepare them for that in terms of teaching them to learn faster, and in some cases to learn more autonomously, because there are some fantastic online learning resources now on the web, and people are teaching themselves languages and digital skills and all sorts of things without anybody having to sit, and in a classroom and teach them.
I mean, Neil asked a rather, again, direct question I think lots of people are worried about, and that as we move towards the age of AI, well, we're in the age of AI and robotics, he's wondering why is it worthwhile teaching people when they're going to be out of jobs anyhow? We maybe have to teach them to do other things, to live a life where we live in a perpetual gig economy. And so our whole attitude towards work and leisure and what we do and whether we do it full time has to change.
Well, I think there we're getting onto a completely different set of subjects to do with what will be this future, and I think it's really hard, as I say, to crystal ball gaze exactly how this is going to play out. Many people are thinking about it and writing about it, and I think anybody who says they know how it's going to play out is probably delude themselves. I think it's very hard to predict, but I would agree that things are definitely going to change, and I think that's where I think our agility is one of the most important things along the way. Our ability to react as those changes come along, and to put people in the best possible position for being able to react to those changes by enabling them to learn new skills faster.
I mean, you say teachers are often your partners in this. You've met teachers who are enthusiastic, who want to innovate, who want to work with children and with students in the way you say, but it's the sort of middle management, it's the top management. I mean, you talk about business working with schools, but government seems to think business wants A levels and O levels and targets and things like this so that they can put on their CVs. How can you say to them, this is not really what business wants? We want more flexibility.
Well, as I said earlier, I think I'm not suggesting you can get rid of all qualifications. I think clearly you need to have some way probably of assessing where people have got to in that learning journey. But I do think the more valuable skills are that certainly we use, in terms of the engineers that we hire. It is the ability to solve problems in creative ways. It is the ability to collaborate, within teams. It is intersectional thinking. It's about taking ideas from other areas and applying them to your problem domain to come up with completely new solutions. It is entrepreneurship. These are the kinds of skills that often people acquire later in life, if you like, once they've started their working lives. And I'm just suggesting that some of these should be front-ended and perhaps developed at a school, within school, as part of still learning about subjects, within the current curriculum. So I'm not suggesting throwing it all out. I'm suggesting, just it's the way that you go about the learning. The real outcome is going to be the skills that you learn along the way, rather than the specific knowledge that you acquire. Because honestly, knowledge is just going to be at our fingertips in ever more instantaneous ways, and so it's now just a truism that the things that people used to learn, now they just rely on being able to type it into a search engine and find it. And imagine when that is always with you, whether it be in a head-up display or projected onto your car windscreen or whatever, and it's just the more pervasive that immediate access to information becomes, the more devalued the remembering of that information is. Obviously, what we need to develop is wisdom, around how you interpret that information and make sense of it, but also how you do, how you make the creative leaps armed with that information to come up with new things. And it's those meta skills that I think are the most valuable ones that we can impart into our students.
I mean, you talk about developing those skills, you call them meta skills, but you also talk about developing them at a micro level as you work with schools, bit by bit. But in your presentation, you also talked about the macro changes as well, having a Royal Commission, turning the apprentice levy into a training levy, which incidentally has not been too successful, I gather. I mean, how are we going to make those big changes as well as the small changes? What do we do to do that? Have you given any thought to that? Because obviously you thought what you want to do, but the question is, what do we want to do? And the next question is, how do we do it?
Well, I think that's why, I suggested that we probably need to create something like a Royal Commission to look at this in an independent way, because this is not, these are big fundamental changes, we're going to have to make, to, I think, our education system. And I certainly don't have all the answers. And I'm just making the case for the fact that we ought to start the discussion and start the big thinking, because, given the scale of the transformational changes that, lie ahead of us, these do require, kind of a non-linear response. We can't just tinker at the margins with this. We're going to have to do something big here. It is not about, changing one kind of exam to another. This is about a fundamental rethink. And obviously, as I say, companies like Finland have tried to do some of that big thinking around education. I think there are, good examples around the world. And just like I said about intersectional thinking, which is all about stealing ideas from one domain and using them in another, we should certainly do some of that. But, we have a fantastic history, if you like, history or pedigree when it comes to education in the UK. And therefore, let's use that and let's free it and allow it to do some extraordinary things in this country. We just have to think big. That's the point. We have to allow ourselves to think big, given the scale of the challenge that lies ahead of us.
Yeah, I mean, Terry likes your quote about, where is the wisdom we've lost in knowledge, and we're so interested in giving people bits of often irrelevant knowledge that we don't give them time to think, or we don't give them time to have the wisdom to think, and that's really important. I mean, do you think that in a way, culturally in this country, and I guess in many other countries too, we're still a bit stuck in the 19th century model of factory education, and it's that we've got to get out of? In the way the industry is getting out of the factory, we're in the service and digital age. Schools have got to get out of that as well.
Yeah, I suppose, in a way, I think in the same way that, a virtual store allows, if you like, a huge amount of personalization in terms of different shopping styles and people being able to organize, if you like, the way they shop to fit their particular shopping agenda, which is something we spend a lot of time thinking about, and indeed using things like machine learning to power that. I think the same thing is possible when it comes to trying to do that within schools, and people do learn in lots of different ways, and I think the more that we can accommodate that and allow them to explore a subject in a way that excites them and inspires them, and when they get stuck, to call out to the teacher, or maybe in the future, as I say, to their peers or another piece of AI maybe, to actually say, I'm stuck here. I don't understand this, and to be kind of guided over that obstacle, and to continue the process. And I think that's, and it can be very collaborative. This is not about everybody just stuck in front of screens, not talking to one another. I think, if we create these tools right, they will be highly collaborative. I think the more that we can make that collaboration, not just within the classroom, but across classrooms, across schools, and indeed across different cultures, and continents, that will produce learning opportunities that we don't have at the moment. It'd be fantastic if I wanted to create a science experiment, in London, but I want to use data that's coming, maybe, from a school on the other side of the world. That's a much richer, potentially, learning experience, because along the way I'll have dialogues with those other children. I'll understand, more about what their lives are like, and I can do the opposite for them, or those children can do the opposite for them. So it's it teaches a whole load of other things to do with cross-cultural understanding that goes far beyond just, if you like, pure education. It's not as if we don't have some significant problems in our world now with understanding across cultures. So if we can make that part of the educational experience too, that will also endure into people's adult lives.
So in a way, we're deschooling society without getting rid of the classroom, but now the classroom is becoming global, and that's a big change, yeah?
That is a big change, but we can start it in small steps. This doesn't have to be a complete revolution overnight. I think if we start building some of these frameworks to facilitate this, and I'm sure some of these exist already, I'm just probably unaware of them, but if we can start building those in, but I think the first thing is you have to create some space, because there is very little space in the current learning sort of sausage machine. It's been difficult enough for schools to find space for something like teaching GCSE computer science, because unless we it's a bit like schools are mandated to have a certain amount of time for physical education, and it's almost like we have to create some equivalent slots for some of this more experimental curiosity-based learning, because otherwise, if it's all about league tables and judging schools and teachers based on those kind of outcomes, of course, schools will respond accordingly, and so we have to let them off the hook, I think.
So in a way, you're doing what people are doing in Newcastle. The University of Newcastle has done. You're advocating what they call self-organized learning environments, where they use computers, but they get together face-to-face as a result of that. And they've discovered, in work that they've done in India, that when people do that, even without a teacher and without going to school, they can learn faster than had they gone to school. And is that the sort of thing that you see as the future?
I believe so. I mean, I think people, as I say, I think if you allow people to find what works for them in terms of learning, then they're likely to go faster. And of course, if you're inspired by what you're learning, and you understand the purpose, and you can see that you are, you are actually learning something rather than just rote learning something that somebody else has discovered, then you will go the extra mile, and you'll, it's the same way that, as an engineer, when I get immersed in solving a problem, kind of time goes away. You get so excited about solving the problem and the process, the creative process of what you're building, that it's something that you almost don't want to put down. And wouldn't that be great, if we got to the stage that more children, got up in the morning with some excitement about what they were going to learn at school and the way in which they were going to learn, rather than, feeling, they would, it's just another day.
Yeah, I mean, adding that excitement to education is the thing that you're advocating, and I think that's what everybody believes should happen, but often it doesn't in some of our schools. In your presentation, you talked about being digital literate, but you also talked about being data literate. And how important is that in the age of big data, when big companies, we know about Cambridge Analytica and so on, but companies can get huge amounts of data about us. You can, from the data on social networks and so on, know more about a person than their partner knows about them. And you can actually manipulate people. What's the danger of big data taking over as well? and business is controlling us in a way like Cambridge Analytica or Facebook or whoever it is. And how important is it for us to teach data literacy so people are aware of those dangers?
So I think there are two separate things there: what people do with data, and, you know, if you like, the learning the skills to manipulate the data, and clearly, you know, how data is used, and respecting privacy and security around that data, you know, are hugely important, you know, concerns that you know, are front and center of what businesses, particularly online businesses, need to worry about. But, you know, within a business, you know, like ours, where we generate an enormous amount of data just about how the operations are working, you know, and how we optimize, if you like, the efficiency of those operations using that data, how we then feed those data into machine learning and AI systems in order to make them self-tuning, because the trouble is the complexity, you know, of certainly what we deal with, you know, in our business, in many cases, you know, is beyond, you know, what humans can realistically manipulate. And I think the important thing, going back to the question about data literacy, is, you know, data, you know, is a new kind of currency, and it's not just about machine learning and AI. It's also just about being able to gain insights from data and being able to work with it to get the answers to questions, and you know, understanding, you know, how, you know, what the importance of things like bias, and if you like, making sure that you know, you are not drawing false conclusions, you know, from the data you have. And I think that those are skills that are going to be useful to people in all sorts of walks of life. It's not just about becoming a, you know, a computer scientist here. I think we're facing a future that is going to be more and more awash with data, whether it be, as you say, from things like social media, from sensors and the Internet of Things, you know, all sorts of, you know, smarter appliances and connected cars, and, you know, there's going to be more and more data, and therefore we need to have better skills and better tools, you know, for manipulating that data.
Yeah, Neil Bailey raised a skeptical point about learning's about getting organizations, businesses to make money, and so the schools are sort of feeders into the corporate world to make money. And in a way, that your point about, in your presentation, about critical thinking is a way of trying to challenge that, isn't it? You don't actually get the student to say, you know, we're going to teach you something in order that you can help business develop and grow. We're going to teach you to be a critical thinker so that you can challenge everything.
Yeah, it's that, but I would personally disagree that that's what education is about. I think one of the outcomes of education is to perhaps prepare you, you know, for your working life. But it's only one outcome. It's also to prepare you for your whole life, you know, and that's about developing your emotional intelligence. That's about helping you understand and collaborate and communicate with you know, other people in all parts of your life. It's not just, you know, about your working life. That's just one outcome, albeit a very important outcome, perhaps. But so I think we have to view education as a holistic set of outcomes, and rather than it just being a sort of you know, a rat race that ends in with you getting a job. You know, I think that's a rather restrictive description of it.
I mean, in the 1960s, there was a growth in the movement about liberal education and holistic education. And in the 1980s onwards, it went back to a much more business-orientated approach, and schools became very target-orientated. And Terry is Loan earlier was worried about that. He said schools are more restricted today than they used to be. I mean, how do we get that liberal approach, that holistic approach back? I mean, how do we put that catalyst into schools that allows you to have the disruptive technology that will make the future possible for students?
Francis, as I said earlier, I certainly don't have all the answers to that. You know, these are very big questions, and as I say, I think there are people who know a hell of a lot more than I do about this process who need to be consulted. But I'm really just I'm painting a picture of a need, you know, of a need to think big here, and I believe, you know, we're very creative as a species, and I believe that we can definitely do something very exciting in this area. But it's not a. It's gonna have to be thought of in a joined up way. If we just look at it in terms of tertiary education, I don't believe it's going to work. If we have to look at it across the whole of that pipeline, and we have to think, what do we really want to end up with in terms of the outputs from education, in terms of it best serving not only businesses but also, you know, society at large. Because, you know, that is what I think education is there for. You know, it is to prepare people, to prepare the next generation for the role that they will play, you know, as adults in society, as well as hopefully enjoying the journey along the way. But you know, it's so therefore you have to think big here. You have to, and the trouble is that most of government is quite siloed. You know, it's very much, you know, individual decisions being taken, and here it's almost like you're going to have to be prepared to throw a lot of dust up in the air and hopefully not just see where it lands, but, you know, help it land in the right places to end up with a new set of outcomes. And as I say, this needs a lot of thinking about, but I don't think we can't take too long about this, because these waves of change are going to start coming at us soon. And why I call it a tsunami is, I think one of the characteristics of a tsunami is, you know, often it's slow at first. You know, you see the water going out, and then it starts coming. But what's different about a tsunami from a wave is once it hits you, it just keeps coming. There is no let up, and that's what I think this is going to be like. You know, when this wave of transformational change hits us, there's going to be no going back, and so we need to get on and do this soon, I believe.
Okay, well, we've sort of come to the end of the time of the webinar now, and Terry Lone is saying, you know, thank you. We thought it was a great webinar, and it's great to see someone from business coming to the same ideas about how education should develop as he does as an educator. And it's that meeting of minds across boundaries that's so very, very important that you talked about, Paul. We're going to carry this forward. We're going to do some more webinars on this. We've got a House of Commons meeting about the impact of AI on society in general. We've got a meeting in Conway Hall coming up on what is secondary education for, with Sir Anthony Selden and Melissa Benn, and we'll put some of the points I'm sure that we raised in this webinar to them, because they may actually, although there are different political spectrums, they probably have similar ideas about how education should develop in a holistic way, in the way you spoke as well. And we have a group certainly in Global Net 21, of which Terry is one, and several others who believe, like you, Paul, that, you know, it's big changes, it's needed, and it's got to be done in a hurry. I mean, it is a tsunami, as you say, coming towards us. And I think you've dealt with that issue really, really well. And I think, you know, you've made a lot of people think. And what's great about your presentation, you're not the dystopian person. You have the utopia view. You believe, yes, Paul, that things can change and they will change for the better. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm definitely an optimist. As I say, I think we're a very creative and enduring species, and I think we can do something extraordinary, you know, in this area. But you know, we must get on and do it soon.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for doing this webinar with us, Paul. I mean, it's been incredibly interesting, and it's lasted the whole hour and we could have gone on. So thanks for doing this, and thanks for the questions that have come up as well. And, you know, we'll carry on with this debate and we'll continue this discussion. Hopefully we'll have a small part to make in the change that must take place. So thank you again, Paul, and we'll end this webinar now.